Hello, Alex. Welcome to the BTS Creative Academy podcast. We're currently streaming live across YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. We're here today to have a conversation about your show that's going to the Edinburgh Fringe this summer. Nice to meet you, Alex. Thank you.
Very nice to meet you too, Martin. No, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yes, well, I mean, I've been looking into your show today.
Okay.
Very interesting. The Snake Boy Takes Manhattan. Tell me a little bit about this show.
So it is the second show that I've done as the character of the Snake Boy. I did the first show quite a few years ago, originally back in Australia, where I portray a character known as the Snake Boy, who is a boy who was raised by snakes in the Australian Outback, and who then needs to learn how to become human. And the show is kind of like a very interactive clown, I guess, kind of very clownish show that I'm using a lot of interactions with the audience to kind of build a narrative and build the experience and stuff. So I did that first show for about 3 or 4 years. Some of those didn't count because they're pandemic years, you know how it is. And I finally felt like returning to the character to do like a kind of proto sequel almost. And it's just been developing the last few months.
And so this is a one-man show, a one-man piece, is it?
Yeah, pretty much. It's only me on the stage for almost all of it, and then a little surprise appearance of someone at the very end.
Okay, you don't give anything away.
I won't. I'm just like I'm very definitional. Like, what does it mean, a one-man show? How much percentage of the time does it have to be one person?
So with this, what we're 99% of the show is just you.
I would say 99% is accurate. Yeah.
And you said there was a little bit of audience participation within this show. Does that mean the show is partly improvised?
Yes. I mean, there is probably less audience participation in this version of the show than the first show that I did, because the way that I begin the show is that Snake Boy, my character, doesn't know how to talk or walk or really interact on a human level in any way. And so I'm very reliant on the audience to kind of give me prompts to move the story forward and move the character forward. There's a lot of fun elements to that, where the things that the audience say to me in those opening few minutes can often be repeated throughout the show and become comedic in their own right, because we have like this shared experience with them.
You create
little
like
moments like
that goes through the whole thing that you keep
exactly.
I guess that kind of makes it feel quite personal, I guess.
Yeah, I like the experience of making the show feel bespoke each time. Little moments like an audience member just inadvertently saying that they're sorry to me will be oft repeated throughout the entire show. And like 50 minutes in, I can just say, "Oh, I'm sorry" to someone, and everyone erupts into applause and laughter. No, but they love that we create these kind of callbacks together.
Mm-hmm. So you wrote this show as well. This is you wrote, you direct, self-directing.
Yeah. Wrote is an interesting word, because, as you say, there is a lot of improvisation to it. So oftentimes certain parts of the show are just like 3 dot points on a piece of paper that I have in my head. But I more or less worked on this show by myself, the previous show by myself. It's been a while just kind of as a solo practitioner. This version of the show, thankfully, I managed to get some outside eyes on, which was really good. It had been the first time I had like a director kind of look over it for me and give me suggestions and stuff, which was really great. It's just helpful to have someone to bounce strange ideas off of, because it's very hard to rehearse something like this by yourself.
Yes, it's really difficult to have to be on your own. You've got this vision, but you don't actually get to see it if you're in it. And you can't look at it objectively, can you? You can't look at the piece and go, how does this look? You get how it feels, and you can look outwardly and you can get a summary, but yeah, you can't really analyze it, can you, and break it down and figure out what's going right and what's going wrong when it's just you, or can you?
No, I mean, especially with elements of the show that are heavily reliant on the audience's reaction, it's almost impossible to rehearse those. And a lot of those I end up rehearsing at, open mic spots. Just pretty much any stage time you can get, like a 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute spot. And those can sometimes be quite painful because I'm trying things that I've never tried before in front of anyone for the first
Yes.
time, and just seeing if there's anything funny about little things that I do or little props that I show them. I made a comment a few weeks back to my partner that I have to do a lot of rehearsing in my head, and she is since relentlessly mocked me for this.
Okay.
Just the idea of me sitting by myself in a room, imagining scenarios in my mind and just rehearsing it all. But more or less, a lot of it has to be done like that.
So do you go into kind of like a meditative state? Is it kind of like you're meditating and you're kind of imagining the outcome of the show?
Um, I wouldn't necessarily say meditative state, but I mean, I have kind of my main background in writing, and I'm fascinated and enamored by all of the kind of story structure stuff, right? When we look at classical hero's journey, story circle type things. So, really, I think when I am rehearsing in my head, what I'm doing is I'm just trying to envision any little scene, any little joke that I'm doing in that kind of roadmap,
Hmm.
in like a mental roadmap almost. So it's not necessarily that I'm envisioning myself on a stage doing the things. It's more so just, does that make sense if I have a moment here that looks like this, and then a moment here that looks like this?
So you're trying to create a map, aren't you, for this character?
Hmm.
A
Yeah.
journey. Where could they go? Where are the possibilities? Having played this character for a number of years now, have you come across anything unexpected when performing?
Oh, I mean, all the time. It's a very fun thing to do because I get such unexpected reactions from the audience every single time. I think early on, one of the first times I ever performed this, like the third or so performance, I had an audience member get up out of their seat unprompted and slammed like a cream pie in my face. Now, to be clear, the cream pie was on stage from earlier. I did introduce that into the space. I didn't bring that with me, but it was something that we had used like a good 20 minutes ago for something. And they must have been sitting there the whole time being like, I'm really annoyed that he never put that cream pie in his face, because they just decided to get up and do it, which was alarming at first. But then I also was like, it's nice that I can create a show where people do have the feel like they can be safe doing that, because I don't think many comedy shows, like, often the audience feels quite unsafe. They worry about getting picked on, or they get worried about getting involved. So it's nice to have a show where audience members feel like they can.
And do you feel safe in that environment then? Do you feel safe in an environment where the audience might do something unexpected?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think there's an element where when I'm performing as a character, I know that whatever happens is happening to that character, not necessarily to me. And it's a helpful kind of separation for, especially when you're plotting things out for the first time, when you're trying out jokes for the first time. It allows you to, keep a thick skin if things aren't working that well. But I think in that same way, uh, it means that I don't feel too much of a level of humiliation or embarrassment. Like, I've done some pretty strange things in my shows,
Mhm.
and I think I'm quite willing to go to, I wouldn't say depraved levels. It's all still relatively like PG, but like it's fun to play the fool, I think is what it is. And I think I generally feel quite safe in audiences' hands. I nothing has ever happened where I'm like, oh no, this audience member is going to take advantage of the trust that has been built here.
Do you set out kind of any guidelines or boundaries with your audience then? how do you welcome them into this safe space where it is a bit different than a normal show? It is a bit different to the standard stand-up. It sounds to me like it fits somewhere in between the two.
Yeah, I think, I mean, as an audience member, I go and see a lot of this kind of like alternative clown comedy theater stuff. And I think regular theater and also this kind of theater comes with a predetermined set of rules, right? So to a certain extent, I don't necessarily need to build too much stuff up. Like, I know that if I've got a theater going audience, they're probably going to sit quietly and listen in until they start to get prompted to get involved. And perhaps a more savvy kind of clown audience, they will be more willing to jump up. They'll be more willing to get on the stage and get into things. But I think in terms of actually setting up that environment, the first thing is just I have to know that they're more scared of me than I am of them. I think is the first fact. And so it's more about me establishing the rules of how they're allowed to interact with me. And it's about setting up games. That's the kind of terminology we use. It's like set up the rules of the particular game that we are playing. So for example, with Snakeboy, I'm often starting off with a very simple game of mimicry, right? If somebody says something to me, I'm going to mimic it back at them. Right? If they do a strange movement, I'm going to mimic it back at them, things like that. Very simple game and very simple rules. They know that right now they can stay in their seats and they can respond, and I will respond to them. For example, I once had a kid in my show, like a 6-year-old child happened to be watching the show. And there's nothing explicitly like mature about the show itself. But what was very funny was that at one point the kid left the room and somebody said like a swear word. Someone said like fuck or whatever. And so Snakeboy responded, would like mimic that. But then once the kid came back into the room, suddenly the whole audience is like, oh no, we have to make sure Snakeboy doesn't say that word. We have to avoid it as much as possible. And then there was a fun game in that because I, as a performer, know, and they know that I, as a performer, know the real world stakes that are occurring. And I think that provides a good analogy for, they know that I can call stop, I can call time out, either cleverly in character or out of character at any point that it's something that I'm not comfortable with. Yeah, I think that's key.
It's a really interesting space that you're creating here. That you're creating it's like a world within a world, isn't it? That you're creating. It's like there's an unsaid thing going on here. You know, everyone knows that that you're an actor, that you're a performer, but yet you're this snake boy as well. And that we're all gonna play a little game now, aren't we? We're all gonna play this game of Alex's Snake Boy. So where did this for Snake Boy come up? So this is a sequel show.
Yes, as I said, yeah.
And this is a character that you've been doing for a number of years. Where did this start with? I get vibes of the Jungle Book, of Tarzan.
Yeah, I mean, it is all that kind of,
and then a little bit of even like Crocodile Dundee, maybe like that kind of like person from the jungle that doesn't really know how to interact with everyone. Where did this start for you then, Snake Boy?
So I think those are the tropes that I decided to play with once I kind of came up with the idea. But honestly, it comes up from just like the most innocuous place. Like I would just play a little game with my friends sometimes just to annoy them, where they would ask me to like grab their glass from a table. And I would just suddenly act as if I didn't know how to do that. Like I'd be like, oh, I'm not sure how to move my hand to do that. And I would kind of get them to instruct my arm almost like it was a claw machine. So they would be like, go a bit more left. And then obviously I'd overreach the left and I'd go back a bit. And I just found that very fun. I was like, it could be fun to do that with an audience where like they have to kind of direct my hand movements because I don't know how to do it. And then I was like, what kind of person doesn't know how to use their hands? And I was like, well, a person who was raised by snakes wouldn't know how to use their hands. So I think that's the A to C of the origins. But I think at its heart,
it became like a party joke. Basically, it became like your
party.
Yeah. Like Alex doesn't know how to pick up his beer. Can everyone teach him how to pick up his beer? And
a party joke that I haven't stopped doing for 10 years or something. But I think at the heart, what it really is that I do shows that like to try to interrogate that audience and performer relationship, that kind of, it just makes me a bit not sad, but like I think it's unfortunate that a lot of theater goers, especially going to slightly stranger comedy or even going to like a stand-up night, feel scared about sitting in the front row. They feel scared about this idea of like being picked on or being involuntarily brought into the show.
Yes.
They kind of want the fourth wall to essentially stay there and for nothing to break it. But that's not live comedy. Like that's not like we are both acutely aware of each other, the comedian and the audience member. And so I like to do shows that break that down and allow us to have a more kind of playful sense to the show.
Yeah. I'm thinking back now to times when I've been to stand up or pantomimes years ago. You go to a pantomime and the house lights come up. And you're like, oh my god, where's my eyes gonna go? I'm gonna look at my feet all of a sudden, because you know if you make eye contact, you're gonna be part of the show all of a sudden. And that is a space that, you're right, people do feel a little bit uncomfortable being there. But I can imagine in this scenario you found a way to turn that round.
Well, yeah, I think, and I don't think I'm definitely not the only one who does this like really well, but I think the core principle behind it is that the joke is always on you as the performer. You're the one who holds all the power. And so you should be the one that is being made to look like a fool. If an audience member is able to come up on stage, they should be the hero. They should be the champion. You know, they've been fearless in coming up and joining in, whereas I'm not fearless. I do this all the time, you know. And I think even if we are laughing somewhat, now, you know, we shouldn't really ever be laughing at the audience member. Like I think a very classic stand-up, like, you know, chatting to the audience type scenario is going to be asking them about their job and trying to like riff around that. And ultimately it's mostly harmless, but I don't know. It's so much more fun when you can get excited about that audience member being involved as opposed to trying to kind of punish them for getting involved.
Mm-hmm. So where has these ideas come from? This way of doing the show. Where did this come? Like you've come up with this party trick, that has turned into a character, but was you inspired by another type of show, another type of comedian that did something similar?
Well, I think around the time that I started developing this, I started to watch more clown shows and more kind of alternative comedy shows. So I think in Australia, it was pretty, especially in Sydney, pretty par for the course. There wasn't too much alternative comedy around when I was, or at least very easy to get to when I was first starting this kind of stuff, like, you know, when I was 19, 20 or whatever. But then I know there are a few Australian comedians that went to like Goliath, the clown school. And when I saw their shows and saw the kind of transition from them doing mostly stand up, maybe a little bit of sketch, to stuff that was like involving the audience and like miming, which doesn't sound crazy, but like to me, who hadn't seen that kind of stuff before, I was like, oh, wow, this is so cool. And so really it was just taking that idea of, I did a solo show which had Snake Boy just as like a bit part, like a 5-minute sequence. And then I was like, it would be a very interesting challenge to try and do that for an entire show, to try to start with nothing, start with a character that knows how to do, you know, has no connection to the human world, and see where we can take it, like see where it gets to. And when I describe it like that, it sounds a lot more free form and avant-garde than it actually is. Like I did have a very specific plan in mind, because I think it's too difficult. It's too difficult to do a show completely built off of those audience reactions. But yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. I saw other shows that I really enjoyed using these things, and I wanted to challenge myself.
I guess if you did a show that was completely improvised, it wouldn't necessarily go anywhere, would it? It sounds to me like there is a definitive journey with this character that you want to take this character on, and you want to entertain, not just make them laugh. You want to, you want to put on a show, not just engage. You're trying to do a few different things with this thing here, aren't you?
Well, that's exactly right. As I said, I'm a writer. I love storytelling. I love the structure of it all. And trying to do a show that's completely improvised, it doesn't have that same level of satisfaction. There is definitely some level of satisfaction because the audience is impressed by how well you can kind of connect things kind of on the fly. But it's not that same feeling that you get when you finish a really good story and you're like, oh, wow, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to that. Amazing.
I'm feeling like this is like a theatre version of a choose your own adventure story. Do you remember them books? I think you still get them.
Yeah. Don't you worry, I read plenty of those.
Yeah, where you start off with this character that's going on an adventure, and then it's like, right, do you want to go this way, or this way? Is there an element of that can the audience dictate the direction at all for the adventure?
So not as much in this show, and maybe that's the end goal. Maybe it will eventually get to that point. I think it would be really that's blue sky thinking. I'd love for Snake Boy's journey to New York City to be, informed somewhat by the things that the audience is telling him and expecting him to do. But it becomes so much harder to plan for that. However, I have done a show previously called One Man, 12 Angry Men, which had more of this kind of interactive choice-based element. So in that one, I had 12 different characters that I had written and prepared. And then the audience would get a little app on their phone when they came in, which they would use to vote for which character they wanted to see me perform as. And then whichever character got the most votes, I would come out and perform as that character. And so we would do that multiple times throughout the show, meaning that every show they would only see about 3 different characters would be completely different. And there would be an attempt by me to kind of sync together in some way a narrative from me playing these 3 characters that I had no idea what order it would be or which ones would come out and things like that.
So as a performer, why do you choose to do your own pieces? Why are you choosing to you write and then you perform it? Why are you not an actor that goes out and looks to join other people's work?
I think there's a dual thing here. The first is that I'm not really trained as an actor. I went to university and did kind of dramatic society stuff there, performance stuff there, but I've never had any kind of formal training. And as much as I love performing, acting is fun, but it's not really the kind of passion point, I guess. As much as I love collaborating with other people, it's a very different game, and it's a difficult game, and is a different level of thick skin you need to be able to do it, to go to dozens of auditions and to film dozens of what are they called, self tapes and stuff, and just going and going and going. And I get enough rejection from writing stuff. I don't want to get the rejections from acting as well. But to connect that, I think my real passion point is in writing, and specifically in writing comedy. And I think in the UK in particular, live performance is has a good pipeline to writing work. You see it on a big scale all the time with performers doing fringe shows that then lead to TV writing gigs. You saw it most recently with Baby Reindeer. He managed to get his fringe show eventually produced by Netflix and things like that. And even on a smaller scale, people that are successful that I've seen in recent times successful at the Fringe have then gotten gigs writing their own programs on BBC Radio 4 and all of that kind of stuff. So as much as I love performing, it does feel like a conduit because I want to be doing that eventually.
Yeah. The writing is the thing for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because I've found over the years I've met a lot of actors that write out of necessity, and they write these pieces because it's hard work to get the gigs with other people. I was trying to be an actor for 20 years, doing the auditions, hitting my head against the brick wall, and I couldn't figure out a way to do the thing that I love. And so a lot of people say to me, "Oh, write your own thing," and that would be an answer to it. Write your own thing. And that's what a lot of actors do. So that's really interesting, though, that you're taking it from the other perspective. That you want to be the writer, and so therefore to make your writing happen and to come alive, you're then performing in it.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, what's interesting is that even just on a numbers game, there are so many more roles for actors out there than there are for writers. And in a way, the proliferation of YouTube and then TikTok and all these other like video-based social media sites has made it even easier for you to get your face out there, right? As a performer, as an actor. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's perhaps easier. There are other routes. However, as a writer, it's still really difficult because production-wise, short films aren't looking for writers. Feature films aren't looking for writers. It's very like I went to film school, did a master's, and joined all of the kind of Facebook groups and the LinkedIn pages and things like that for gigs and freelance stuff. And you'll constantly see posts about, oh, I need these 3 actors for this production. I need a cinematographer for this production. I need a editor for this production, but no one's looking for writers. I think a big part of that is that people maybe don't appreciate the technical aspect of writing as much and think that they can do it themselves, which is, they absolutely can. Everyone can pick up a pen and do that. But it does mean that you're less likely to hire a writer for hire. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
and I guess writing is a creative art that doesn't necessarily happen to a time scale. You can't say, right, we're going to make this film in 6 weeks from now. I need the script in 6 weeks. It doesn't necessarily work like that, does it?
No.
It's normally a process of time that can take 6 months to have the idea, and then 6 years to make it come true.
It's a really slow process, especially for screen to write for screen.
So you bill yourself as a screenwriter as well, on your website.
Well,
So how does that
on the way.
How does screenwriting differ from your playwriting, or does it not?
Well, I mean, I think everything comes back to the same basic story principles. And screenwriting and playwriting are very similar in that you are dealing with limited time, right? When you're writing a book, or a book is probably the best example. When you're writing a book, they can be any length, really, and people can kind of put them down and pick them up again. And it's okay if you read 20 pages and the plot doesn't advance that much. Like, maybe you might lose some readers, but ultimately it's a very different medium, and the story structure can be a bit more free form. But the key to playwriting and screenwriting that I've found is that people's attention wanes very quickly. Like, I did a preview of my current show recently, and one of the main notes that I got from like the dramaturg, the kind of director that came on with me, is that there are certain parts of it where it felt like the wheels were spinning, right? I was talking about a place that I was going to get to, and I was taking too long to get there. And it wasn't necessarily that the show was running too long in those segments. It was just that it had reached the point of the story where we as an audience wanted it to progress. And I think that oftentimes when we see films, and it has this problem where it has some wheel spinning, or it has like pacing issues, we don't even necessarily know how to explain that that's the problem with the movie. We feel it in our gut. We're like, well, the character should have moved on by now. So I think that's the similarities. The differences is just is what I'm talking about before with the fourth wall. Like, live performance is so much more dynamic. because you are acutely aware of the fact that you are in a space with people that are watching and reacting to the performance. In certain kinds of theater, you want to act like they're not there, right? You want to preserve that element of the fourth wall. With comedy, for the most part, I think you have to acknowledge it in some way, even if it's entirely internally, even if it's just hearing the laughter. It is always there as a performer, which is very different. You're getting that instant gratification, instant reaction, which you don't get when you're writing for screen.
So, changing the subject slightly.
Yeah.
What are your hopes and dreams from going to the Edinburgh Fringe this year? What do you hope? Because you're quite familiar with festivals. You've won awards for this character previously in its previous incarnation. What was it called previously? The Marvelous
Snake Boy.
The Marvelous Snake Boy, in the first time you brought it around. And what festival did you win awards at?
That was the Adelaide Fringe Festival. Yeah, that was in Australia. Yeah.
And so you're quite familiar with this festival circuit that go into these things. So what do you having done it before, what do you hope will happen with this one?
So at the moment I'm doing a half run for this show at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival this year. So it's about a 2-week run. And at the moment, really what I'm doing is I'm still kind of developing the show, because as we've talked, a lot of it is based on reactions from the audience and kind of finding ways to build the story. And maybe I'll perform the show one night and I'll realize there's a whole section where I'm like, you know what? That's not malleable enough. Like, I'm not getting enough input from the audience in that bit. They could be more fun. And so I can change it and do it completely differently the next night. So I guess this run is designed more so to get the show to its final form. And hopefully, pick up some amount of buzz along the way, like get a few interested parties saying good words about the show. The aspirations for this year are not necessarily, high on the mountaintops, but I just want to have a fringe, because I've done 2 of the Edinburgh Fringes the last 2 years, and they're very stressful, especially when you have really aspirational goals. So I just wanted it to be, I want to develop the show and make it the best it can be, so that then following this, next year, I can go and do a lot of the festivals around the UK, like Leicester and Brighton and all of those leading up to Edinburgh, where I can put a lot of money behind the show to really help sell it, and hopefully just get a bit of acclaim from it, I guess, is the ultimate goal, acclaim so that I can feel like the work is good and it's connecting to people, but obviously acclaim to hopefully get those doors opened for the writing work.
Yeah, that acclaim is fuel, isn't it, for our creativity? It's what drives the thing forward and keeps it alive. Because there is always, I think, with us creative people, I do think sometimes there's like an inner voice that comes out that may say to us, maybe sometimes we don't know how good this actually is. We're putting in all this work and all this effort, but is anyone actually going to like the thing that we're doing? And so I guess we have to put it out into the world and we have to test it out to see. And when people say, yes, it is good, it really gives us a boost, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we tell ourselves, we often hear those conversations about, it's not about the reviews, it's not about awards and things like that. And it's absolutely right. It isn't. Like, in the moment when you're performing on that stage, and then when the show is done, all you really care about is that audience there with you, and whether or not they're enjoying it, and whether or not you're enjoying it as well. If you're not enjoying it, what's the point? But like, those other things are just helpful, helpful because the way I've always seen it, the more you get those, the more you get to do your work in front of a wider and greater audience.
Yeah, the more people will get to see it. The more people enjoy it, the more people. Yeah, it just keeps spreading and spreading, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Essentially, if the work is good. And
That's it. Yeah.
sometimes we need a bit of clarification on that, don't we?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So you touched on something that I want to go back to, because I've heard this quite a
Mm.
bit from talking to people that have been to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival and similar festivals. This word stressful comes up. Now,
Mm.
why would we put ourselves through it? Why do we put ourselves in a position of stress? Why do we put ourselves in a position of people go, oh, that was just so difficult. Why go back?
Well, I mean, it's a complicated question, obviously. I think there's a lot of ways
Yeah.
to attack it. Ultimately, most of the stresses of the Edinburgh Fringe are financial more than anything else,
Mhm.
because it's an expensive thing to go and do. And as much as you might be stressed about, oh, will they like me? Will they not? If you didn't have to put so much money into it, you probably wouldn't worry about it nearly as much. If you knew that you weren't, hemorrhaging your finances or taking a whole month off of work or, putting £2,000 into publicity to hopefully get like the word out, there probably wouldn't be nearly as much pressure on it to be good and
Mhm.
to be perfect. So I think a huge amount of it comes from the financial stuff. I don't know if in a perfect world we got to do this all, with government support or with like further bursaries for the arts or things like that. If it would be less stressful, maybe it would be just as stressful. But I do think that it's a huge thing that comes up when people are discussing this, especially since year on year it's getting more and more expensive to go to the Edinburgh Fringe.
Yeah, see, I want to go to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival to do this,
Mm.
not necessarily in a theatre. I am putting on a live show version of this locally, but I want to go to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival to connect with people. I want to do this on the
Mm.
street with people, and I'm
Yeah.
already looking at my finances and going, well, I've got to eat.
Mm. Yep.
I'm
You
not
have
gonna
to.
be earning any there's not gonna be any income from that whilst I'm there. Accommodation is it's in the middle of summer at its peak, and the cost to stay anywhere within a
Yeah.
200-mile radius of Edinburgh is through the roof. So just those basics alone, like survival basics,
Yeah.
yeah, are difficult, aren't they, to do something like this?
Yeah, it is. Like, I mean, I think it's the same whether you're talking about the Edinburgh Fringe or whether you're talking about performing and living in somewhere like London or New York or LA or really any of the cultural like centers of the world for the arts performance anywhere in Europe. Like it is expensive to be an artist because for so long you are either reliant on income coming in from a secondary source, or just no income at all until you can find a way to make your arts make money, which is unfortunate. It is unfortunate that what is one of our secondary goals when we're doing this is to
Mhm.
find a way to commodify the thing that we are making so that we can eventually live off of it. As I said, there's a much bigger, question of the entire structure of society here, which I don't think we need to get into. But it's definitely all um, it's all pressurized at a place like Edinburgh Fringe because we've been told for so long how important it is.
Mhm.
And we're told for so long how that's the place that you can like be big and get raised up and stuff. And yet, year on year, it's being made more and more clear that those kind of opportunities are more possible for some than for all in terms of the financial, you know, distinction there.
Tell me a little bit more about that the opportunities are more possible for some than for all.
Well, I mean, it's just that I think like the last 2 years I performed at free venues. I'm doing the show again at a free venue this year, and like there is, as you mentioned, accommodation costs, food costs, things like that, and oftentimes that's about all anyone can afford. There are additional costs that come with producing a show that manages to get the kind of acclaim that I think we are all hoping for. And those additional costs come from publicity and marketing, and even beyond that, just from connections, connections within the industry, connections with the media. And a lot of those connections come about from usually some level of inherited influence, whether it be from family, whether it be from friends, whether it just be from the fact that outside influences have allowed you to put more time and money towards your fringe run. You know, like it's definitely sorry.
This is part of it being the entertainment business, isn't it? It does unfortunately come down to money. It does unfortunately come down to how much money are you willing to put into, or that you've got to put into the marketing. How much, you know, and who have you got to bring into your show that will tell others about it? And industry connections. This is definitely one of the things that is a struggle for the industry, the entertainment industry as a whole, whether that's theatre, film, all of it.
And honestly, sometimes it even just comes down to a time thing, right? You know, I think for almost my entire career as a comedian, apart from like a period of time in like my early 20s when I was studying at university, you know, getting support from my family during that, I have had to be working, you know, full-time hours to be able to produce the stuff. Like I'm always making this stuff in the cracks.
Yes.
And I think that makes a huge difference. There are a lot of people who are privileged enough to be able to have that extra time to work on their projects. And beyond that, to be able to produce their projects. Like one of the many things you have to do when you go to the Edinburgh Fringe is just make your media release and send it out to every possible publication, just in the hopes that maybe someone will reach out. And when I do that, I have to do it by half measures because I have limited time in the day before I know that I have to get ready for work, or you know, I'm tired after work. I can't necessarily bring myself to the social energy to do all of that. And there are some people who have the advantage of perhaps living more of a, you know, what's the right term? More of a freelance lifestyle, perhaps. And, you know, I am by no means disparaging people who have those opportunities because oftentimes they've worked very hard to get them. I think, you know, it's sometimes a privilege, sometimes not, I guess.
I wonder how important it is to our art, to our craft, that we do have this struggle, that we do have, that it doesn't all just come easy to us, that we do have to go through the stress of living for a month, hand to mouth, just to make sure that the craft is seen, that we have to, that we have to struggle through it to make it happen. Then when we get to the other side of that struggle, to enjoy and see the success. Would we actually enjoy and see it if it was all handed to us?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is that anytime I've had one of those odd experiences coming from this, I've always thought, this is great content. This is great. You know, I remember doing a medical trial once because I was low on money. It wasn't anything crazy. It wasn't anything dangerous, but I do remember like lying in hospital thinking about the absurdity of it all in a way. Just like they only gave me one pill. They gave me one big pill, and it was probably the sugar pill.
I'm hearing about it a lot, that a lot of artists do fund themselves through medical trials. I was speaking to a film director recently, and he financed his film on medical trials. He did a medical trial where you went into a room for 2 weeks, got paid £5,000, and that was like the launch pad to his film for being locked up for 2 weeks. So I guess, we do have to find ways to fund our dreams, don't we?
Yeah. And I mean, like, I think it's impossible to say whether or not we necessarily need this level of suffering, this level of cockroach era-esque scrambling about to give authenticity to our art. I don't know if we need it necessarily. I think it'd be nice to get the opportunity to see if we did. You know, I think it'd be good to see how that would work for a while, and maybe all of our art would be terrible, and then fine, then we can go back to this way if we feel like we need to. But let's give it a shot where we're not all struggling to make it.
Well, so
Yeah.
hypothetical then, what would a society look like that allowed artists and creatives to have the freedom to produce their dreams?
I mean, I'm always thinking about how that would actually work. I think there have been some like I'm not very well studied on this, but I do believe that there are some countries in Europe that have kind of like artist salaries almost,
Mhm.
where they certain practitioners apply to kind of get like almost a salary, like a weekly bursary. And while that is occurring, they get to work on their art, like giving themselves the freedom for that. Something like that. Honestly, it may make me sound like a dull bludger, but
Yeah.
when the during the pandemic, I was studying my master's, and it was quite a difficult time to be trying to do a film degree. However, the government at the time increased the like unemployed pay, and they also gave benefits to pretty much anyone that was working as well, but obviously couldn't go into work. And the amount of money that they provided for pretty much the entirety of Australia for that period of time was essentially like a universal living wage. And during that period of time, I just remember obviously the world was suffering in so many ways, but I just couldn't believe that I was in a situation for the first time in my life where I was studying to do film and I wasn't worrying about money. I wasn't worrying about how I was going to get to my next meal. I wasn't worrying about how to pay for rent this month because there was enough money coming in that could kind of deal with my most basic living things while I was learning my craft. So I think that would be the dream world where everyone is just provided enough resources to have that stuff covered, and
Mhm.
then they could go and pursue whatever particular interest or dream that they had without having to worry about eventually making money off of it.
See, I guess for that to happen and to become a reality, I'm thinking that we need perhaps as a society as a whole to understand and value the arts more. That we have to
Yeah.
understand what the arts give to all of us. And someone recently, a friend of mine, told me a fact about the economy that every year the arts and entertainment industry contributes 10.8 billion pounds to the economy,
Yeah.
and it's like the third biggest contributor underneath things like science and technology.
Mm.
And so it goes
Yeah.
to show, like, so there is a financial value to the arts, and then you can also look at the funding that comes back out of it. That money that's put in is the UK is the lowest in Europe. We don't we get put
Mm.
back something like 0.3%, whereas the rest of Europe are doing a full 3%.
Yeah.
So there is more that can be given
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
within that budget if we want to see the input and the value shine through.
Yeah. And I think hopefully numbers like that will get through to people. But I always remember another thing during the pandemic was the kind of very far right newspaper, which is
Mhm.
still very popular in Australia, published this like article because the whole terminology around essential workers was like big in the lexicon. And they published this paper with a fun little article, fun little graph, being like, "Oh, here's what Australians believe are the top 10 most essential workers." You had things like nurses and doctors and so on and so forth. And they were like, just for fun, we also asked people what they thought the 10 most non essential workers were. And they had a little graph there. And right at the bottom, as the most non-essential worker, were artists. And then I think consultants were number 2. But it was just astounding to see it printed so plainly. And obviously, like, there was a certain gender behind that. But I think in a lot of countries, there is that kind of sentiment from people that the artists, the people that make the arts, are like not as important a fabric of the society.
But for me, the argument against that every time is, well, what did you do during COVID? Did you read books? Did you watch TV? Did you listen to music? What would you have done in that time had you not had those things?
Yeah.
How
Go
bad?
to a consultant, I guess.
Yeah. Exactly. And what fuels the consultants? What fuels them to continue in their day? What fuels the doctor to get through the bad times? When they want to switch off from the real world, they retreat into music, books, and TV and theatre.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's like the value is so clear. And we need to keep doing this, and we need to keep sharing our art, and we need to go to these events where we struggle and it's stressful to make sure that we put our craft out into the world, don't we?
Yeah, that's the thing. And I think there is a growing sense of sadness about an event like the Edinburgh Fringe, and a growing number of artists who are kind of deciding, you know what, it's become too corporate. I'm no longer going to become involved. I'm just going to try going to other fringe festivals or trying this or that. And I think there is definitely some value in finding ways to recreate that in other spaces. Absolutely. But I also think it's still worth trying. Like, if you can scrape it together, and there are like so many options for doing it at a low cost. Like, I think there are a lot of artists that are like, it's not worth going to unless you're with one of the big venues. But I've done free venues for 2 years, and you can still get an audience. You can still get that level of acclaim that you're hoping for. And I think it would be really unfortunate if we let the big corporations win. If we just all scarpered and left the ship without trying to stick in it and still try to change it.
So what is the fear about of it becoming corporate? What is that fear? Because a lot of people there want to be part of that corporate world. They want to be part of the business, don't they? So what is the fear? Is it just because they're the only ones the ones that have already made it are the only ones getting a look in, the only ones getting the opportunity? Is that the issue?
I think that's it. Yeah. I mean, I think I've seen it more with some of the smaller festivals in Australia than I see it yet with the Edinburgh Fringe, but there's no doubt that it's heading towards that. Like the Sydney Fringe Festival and the Sydney Comedy Festival is a really small affair, especially in comparison to the Edinburgh Fringe, which is surprising because Sydney is still a pretty big city. But the reason why it's so small is that, in particular, the Sydney Comedy Festival is run almost entirely by a venue and talent agency. So they are venue managers. Sorry, they manage venues, they manage certain comedians, they manage certain talent. And so the comedy festival itself occurs almost entirely in their venues. And for the most part, with their comedians and the people that are on their books. Like, absolutely, other comedians do perform, but it is an almost entirely corporatized comedy festival. And you can kind of feel it in its fabric in many ways when you're taking part in it. So I guess that's the fear, is it's like, if things become heavily corporatized, the people making the decisions may not be making them on an artistic value level. And perhaps it will come a time when we're completely cut out of it. Like, the Sydney Comedy Festival has limited slots, and the people running it are the ones that decide who gets to perform in it. There have been years where my show was not accepted. I think even after I had won an award at the Adelaide Fringe Festival, the very next year they were like, no, we're not going to have your show on in this comedy festival. And I have other friends as well who have been like cut out from it on a particular year. They've been doing comedy in Sydney for like 10 years or more. So yeah, I guess that's the fear. It's like right now, Edinburgh's great. We can all go and do it. Like there's no restriction to that. But maybe one day there will be a restriction. And maybe when that restriction occurs, a lot of people are then going to be completely cut out.
So how do we avoid that from happening?
I don't have all the answers there.
Create our own festivals. Start fresh. Start something new.
Yeah. That would be
maybe this is the natural way of things, that we live in a society that does evolve around money and not necessarily art. So therefore we have to bring it back to basics somewhere else. And because Edinburgh's going to bring in the tourists because it's got the name, but maybe there needs to be a Glasgow festival or a London festival, something new. Yeah, no, I think. Yeah, and I know that there are certainly people out there who are doing that right now, and I think that's possibly an answer. You just hope that history doesn't end up repeating, because I know that was almost the inspiration for. I mean, that was the Edinburgh Fringe Festival originally. That was the Adelaide Fringe. The reason why they were called the Fringe Festival is because they were occurring while the main Edinburgh Festival and the main Adelaide Festival were on. That was like the fringe artists that weren't a part of that were performing that. And then that's become the main thing. So I guess the bigger question is if we do that, how do we future-proof it, I guess? How do we stop that kind of influence from eventually taking over in this space? Or maybe that's a question to the people that run the Edinburgh Fringe, is have they looked at the history and where do they want this to go? Yeah,
I think I mean I definitely don't know enough about the running of the Fringe Society itself, but it does feel like a challenge when you're dealing with these big venues, because they in a way they have become the heart of the festival, right? Like you go there, and when I'm there, I go and see shows at the big venues. I would never suggest. What's the word? Completely stopping that, because it's still an amazing thing,
and it will bring in a lot of tourism. It will bring a lot of people.
And it's because that exists that those tourists then come to the smaller venues and then come to the free shows. Like I do understand that there's still that symbiotic relationship that exists there. It's just. It'd be nice. I think
we've got to find the balance. We've got to find the balance, haven't we? We've got to stop it from tipping too much in one direction.
Yeah, I think when I was doing the Adelaide Fringe Festival, I did it for many years, and there were two big venue companies there, known as Gluttony and The Garden, right? And one of the greatest things that I loved about the Adelaide Fringe in the early years was going to the artist bar and hanging out with the other artists, like chatting to them, like getting to know them, meeting people that were performing in like tiny venues on the other side of town, but also meeting people that were performing in like the big Spiegel tent. But then about 2 or 3 years into my times going to the Adelaide Fringe Festival, the two major venues restricted their artist bars. They made their own separate artist bars specifically for the artists that were performing at those venues. And there was still the kind of like fringe artist bar, but as the Fringe lost money, they then had to open up that artist bar to the public, and they then had to open up that artist bar to having kind of like little corporate events occurring there throughout the year to be able to like get enough money to keep it afloat and keep it running. And it meant that when I was going to that artist bar, a few years in, I was no longer meeting those artists that were performing at the big venues, and I was no longer making those connections and meeting new people and collaborating and stuff. And I think that's the problem. Like, if we're all involved in this, we should all be meeting each other and getting to know each other. There shouldn't feel like there's a wall between those in the big venues and those kind of still working to one day be in the big venues, or so on and so forth.
I guess what I'm getting from this is an idea that maybe we should keep moving then, that we shouldn't get too relaxed in one kind of environment and think that maybe this is the only way to do it is perhaps through the Edinburgh Fringe. Maybe we do have to go and seek those smaller festivals as well, those startup places, rather than just the big thing.
Yeah. I've just remembered that I think I've got some eggplant in the oven.
Yes, you're being told. Yes, you have.
Yeah.
All right, one final question for you then, before your eggplant burns. So, what advice would you give to anyone that's attending the Edinburgh Fringe Festival for the first time as a writer performer?
I mean, if you don't have to cancel any shows, that is the best thing that you can do. I think if that is an achievement, that is an achievement. If you're performing in front of one person one night, if you're performing in front of 3 people one night, that's amazing. You've got 26 shows to do, if you're doing the full run, but nonetheless, you've got so many shows to do. Any audience is going to be amazing. And just see lots of shows as well. I think it becomes a job. It becomes a job when you're doing the same show every single day of the week, and you need to be able to relax and you need to be able to turn your mind off. There should be maybe an hour the next day at most where you kind of go over the previous show and think about if you want to make any changes or adjustments and stuff. And the rest of the time, you should just enjoy being at the Fringe. I think that's the best advice.
Wonderful. I really appreciate that, Alex. I appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing. I look forward to seeing you at the Fringe. Where do we find you?
Yes. So it is being performed at Hoots at Potter Row in the small yurt at 6:25 p.m. from the 15th to the 26th of August.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Alex. Appreciate you joining me.
Thank you very much.
And
lovely to meet you.
See you at the Fringe. Nice to meet you too.
See you there. Bye.
See ya. Bye-bye. Bye.